Welcome to our Sealite webinar, the first in a series of 5 webinars hosted by a list of key marine industry professionals. My name is Marianne Dutka and I'm the Product Marketing Coordinator at Sealite and a member of the wider Sealite marketing team. Our webinar topic today is Aids to Navigation Provision and the Steps for Success. Our presenters are Michael Walker, who is our Head of Global Sales, Marketing and Digital for Sealite, Avlite and the Star2M group of companies. Michael is coming up to 13 years with Sealite and forms part of the executive management team. Michael is at the forefront of growth, new technology and innovation across Sealite's product management, marketing and sales teams. Our second presenter is Malcolm Nicholson, who is our Global Product Manager for the Sealite Marine portfolio. Malcolm has over 20 years experience in the AtoN industry. Malcolm is also a Fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation, and he represents Sealite at an international level. He is presently the Chairman of Working Group 1, Light and Vision, in the Engineering Committee of IALA. Malcolm is also the Industrial Members Committee representative to the IALA Policy Advisory Panel and a registered IALA Worldwide Academy expert. Prior to Sealite, Malcolm worked for the Northern Lighthouse Board and he later became the Principal Development Engineer of Visual Signalling for the UK General Lighthouse Authorities. I now invite Michael to introduce our webinar series.
Okay, thanks Marianne for that warm introduction, and good afternoon, good evening and good morning to all of our global delegates wherever you might be around the world. We're absolutely delighted to put together this webinar series and this program. It certainly is the season for webinars at the moment, but this is one that we're extremely proud of. And to follow on from that introduction, Malcolm feels incredibly passionate about the series that we've put together. And so webinar 1 today really sets the scene. So the focus here is around aids navigation provision and those steps for success, of which there is sort of 4 detailed modules that we've identified, and the whole series will build its way through each of these particular modules in a great deal of depth, where we'll invite keynote speakers to support and supplement the content. So today it's all about setting the scene around provision, and Malcolm, as our keynote today, is going to work through that. Webinar number 2 will dive deeper into the IALA risk and the different assessment models and the toolkits that are available. Webinar number 3 will then focus around the systems and the maintenance of those networks. Webinar number 4, it's pretty exciting. The role of IALA in terms of who, what in the background, and the shift from the non-governmental organisation to an intergovernmental organisation. In that particular webinar, we're going to be joined by the Secretary General, Mr. Francis Zachariah. And then rounding out the series will be webinar number 5, where we then make sense of all of the constituent elements in terms of monitoring, maintaining and managing your network of assets. So it's a rich series, and we're really proud to be able to bring this to all of you, wherever you might be around the world. If you'd like to view the speakers today in terms of the functionality, if you just pop up under the View Options tab at the top of your screen, you're able to see the presenters. And then finally, feel free to capture any questions that you might like to ask throughout the webinar and the session today. Pop those into the Q&A box, and then Marianne, Malcolm, myself will facilitate responses to those questions. So strap in wherever you are, and we look forward to the next 30 to 40 odd minutes together. So in terms of the Sealite story, I've been with the business some 13 years, but the story starts all the way back in the early 1980s. Mr. Jeff Proctor was our founder, and we really started as a hobby business. Probably operated for the next sort of 2 decades, and it wasn't until the early 2000s that we sort of date the modern history of the organisation. What's been core throughout for our business is a deep passion for innovation, technology, design, and ultimately manufacturing. And so we're proud today to be the world's largest privately owned aids navigation manufacturer. And we're certainly proud to have probably the world's largest, broadest, deepest portfolio. That image you can see there at the bottom of your screen is our global headquarters here in Somerville on the Mornington Peninsula down in Melbourne, Victoria. Respectfully, we're still in stage 4 lockdown down here, hence we're all coming to you from home, but that's our head office, and we've got now around 105, 110 staff operating out of those premises. We then have an hosted office in Singapore. We've got an office factory facilities up in the UK. We've got a very large and growing organisation factory facility over in the United States. And we've also got an office down in Colombia. And so for our business, it's really critical in terms of our people, our product, our plant is truly available and spread right across the world. Just a couple of pieces around what makes us special, what makes us tick, is that second last point there around that core focus on investing in state-of-the-art equipment. If you've ever been fortunate enough to visit our factories, and for those that haven't yet, we extend a warm welcome. So if you're ever in any parts of the world, we always have an absolute open door policy. You'd have the opportunity to then be able to walk, move through our facilities and see all of that equipment. So we're doing everything from precision die making, running our own injection molds. We're running a full SMT electronics line where all of the electronic components that are designed by our engineers are then brought to life through our own facilities. And then finally, in terms of the why, well, it's all about trying to build the best product, the best solution, whether that be best value, quality, or lead time. And we're proud to do so. And I'd now like to hand over to Malcolm. Over to you, Malcolm.
Thanks very much, Michael. It's fantastic to see so many people on the webinar. Some familiar faces out there and some yet to be known, but I'm sure I'll come across you as soon as we're allowed to get out there and travel again. So an overview of the general presentation. I mean, Mike outlined the different webinars that we're going to be going through, and I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of each of the different webinars that we're going to be covering, and I'll be introducing the keynote speakers for each of them. But really, this centres around maintenance and how you can overcome it, and the tools that you can use to overcome it, and in order to be able to deliver a more reliable, available service to the mariner, who is the end customer after all. That's what we're all here trying to do. So if we start with risk assessment, the SOLAS Convention is really at the heart of this, and it's published by the International Maritime Organization, which ISAF have a consultative status, and don't get confused that ISAF is the International Sailing Federation, not the International Security Assistance Force. But really, Chapter 5 refers to the safety of navigation for all vessels at sea, and all contracting governments are obliged to provide such aids to navigation as the volume of traffic justifies and the degree of risk requires. So it says it there in legislation, volume of traffic, degree of risk. And that's really what we're talking about. And as we grow as a global economy, there are more and more bigger, larger, faster ships, and ports and harbours have to be able to get that risk and analyse that risk and provide such aids to navigation that is justified. The other part of SOLAS says that you should also take into account international recommendations and guidelines, and it directly refers to the IALA Maritime Buoyage System in there. So the IALA Maritime Buoyage System is law. So if you're a contracting government and you're providing aids to navigation, you should be using the IALA Maritime Buoyage System. So that's the why you should conduct a risk assessment. Now, when should you do it? You would normally do it when you're establishing a new AtoN, but a lot of you will have well-established AtoN networks. But if you're having a port or harbour expansion, you may wish to look at establishing new aids to navigation, and you would do a risk assessment as to the range. You would do stakeholder analysis, you would get in pilots, users, all the stakeholders that are there, and you would get them in, and you would review what you were going to do. Or you do it upon re-engineering or replacing end-of-life AtoN, and you would review your risk, whether you have a growing volume of traffic with larger vessels entering the port that perhaps need a larger range, Or equally, it may be that the usefulness of the aids to navigation has been overcome by other options, such as mandatory pilotage, an establishment of a local VTS centre, or something like that. So it's very important that you do this risk assessment and not necessarily just say, well, we've always had one of them, we just want another one. How you go about doing it is you can use one of the three tools given out by IALA, which is the IRAP tool, the POSA tool, or the CIRA tool. Now, the IRAP tool is quantitative modelling, and you really need a well-established AIS network in your area of aids to navigation. But you can use this to estimate the frequency of collision and grounding, and you can play about with your AtoN and reduce the risk to the lowest acceptable level by using this tool. But it does require quite a significant infrastructure. But it'll tell you all about it in IALA Guideline 1123. And the other model is the POSA model. This was developed by the US Coast Guard. And essentially, this is a qualitative or subjective, I wouldn't say subjective, opinion-based, experienced mariner opinion-based model, whereby you have 6 experienced observers and you go out and you view the waterway and you conduct your risk on each aids to navigation within that waterway. Now, and that you can find that in Guideline 1124. Now, I'm very excited to announce that our next webinar, Captain Roger Barker, formerly of Trinity House, who still is the chairman of the working group on navigational requirements within the IALA ARM committee, and he's also the sort of lead keynote speaker at all the IALA risk seminar workshops. So very, very experienced, and he'll be going into more depth with both these models. But I just want to talk to you a little bit about CIRA. Now, when both the previous models were released, of course, they can be quite costly. And so there was a demand for a simplified IALA risk assessment model, which they produced, and you can find that in IALA Guideline 1018. And it's like all different kind of risk assessment models. It's the probability or the likelihood of an incident occurring, and therefore what is the impact or the consequence of that happening. And the idea is if you weigh up these two risks, you get an overall factor, and then you look at what actions you can take to reduce this risk to as low as is reasonably practical, which is acceptable to all the stakeholders. So if we just have a look, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you will have used risk assessments in some way or another, but this is the risk criteria. The frequency, if you like, is the probability. When does it happen? How often can it happen? You know, very frequent is maybe once a week. And then the impact over here, and it covers different criteria as well as environmental, but a lot of you may be interested in the financial impact. And then of course you multiply the two together and you get the result here. So really, or in an ideal world, all of your aids to navigation would be in the green here. Anything in the red you should really look at very, very quickly and sharpish. But just to give you a sort of a high level example of what you can do, you may have a lighthouse that's got an irregular mains power supply. It's often the case because they're generally end of line, they're quite remote. So you get a frequent mains output. So the probability is relatively high, and the impact is relatively low, but you've still got a risk there of 8, which is in the amber, which is a moderate risk, and you should do something about it. Look at implementation of additional control options, which could reduce the risk. So what do? You could consider installing an uninterrupted power supply battery backup. So if the mains were to fail, it would switch over to the battery, and your AtoN would still continue being reliable and available to the mariner. So you reduced your revised risks down to a 2, it's in the green, everything's great. Now there are of course other options that you could explore, and this is a very, very high level example, but it gives you an idea of some of the risk mitigation factors that you can use. And of course within the guideline it does give you a lot of different options for the risk mitigation factors. So if we move on to talk about AtoN Systems, and you really have to view AtoNs in their system-wide structure. So you're going to find an AtoN on some kind of platform or a structure, whether that is a lighthouse or it's a buoy. It may be a pile, it may be a beacon, it may be a withy, it may be a stick in the mud on the side of the riverbed that gives you an idea of depth, but it is a platform or a structure. And then you need to look at the signal transmission. Of course, we talk about visual aids to navigation, flashing lights, but there are also non-visual aids to navigation, such as AIS, which is transmitted by VHF, and you need to consider wavelength propagation. You need to look at atmospherics, you need to look at line of sight, height of observer, height of transmission, things like that. And of course, there's still use of fog signals and horns across the world, so you need to look at the audible signal transmission. And of course, what brings all those together is the power supply. Now, whether that's by mains electricity, or it's by some kind of battery solar hybrid or charging system, but that brings it all together. So if we have a little look at the weakest link, because within system analysis, you always want to be looking at the weakest link, because that's what you've got to go and fix first. So we've got some examples here. A lot of places still do use incandescent lights. In that picture there, you can see a functioning one, and in the right-hand side of that picture, you can see it burnt out. It's not terribly clear there, but that's a clear sign of overvoltage when you get the bubbling of the filament like that. So you might not just go and replace the lamp, you need to have a look at the systems analysis to see why that fault is occurring. Wet lead acids, all sorts of problems with them, you've got to keep topping them up. Transportation becomes an issue, spillage becomes an issue. And then of course we talk about poor steel in chains, and for some time now chain probably has been one of the weakest links within the system due to wear, and so you can see the wear there using poor steel. So where are we up to nowadays? So nowadays we've moved over to LED light source, which is fantastic achievement. So LED is a very clear color, removes the need for filtering, low power. We talk about antennas nowadays, VHF antennas, satellite antennas, GPS antennas. They're all very robust, all IP rated to meet the demands of full oceans and you know, busy ports and harbors. Battery technology has moved on an absolute pace. We've got nickel metal hydride now, we've got sealed lead acid batteries, and of course we've got lithium ion batteries, which I know we're looking into and experimented, but our dear friends at Samsung have probably put that back a year or two with their explosive Galaxy. And then when you look at chain, there have been leaps and bounds made in synthetic mooring, and indeed hybrid systems between chain and synthetic moorings. Now, I've cheekily put in there, I hope there isn't too many mariners on the call today, but there has been a lot of talk about loss of skill set within the mariner and over-reliance on modern technology and things like that. So it could be a contributing factor. So if we go on to talk about maintenance, The pictures there, the graphics there, really are representative of the sort of 4 types of maintenance. And there's still a lot of places in the world that use the traditional maintenance, where you must go every 6 months because that's what we've always done. And we just do the same thing every time that we go there. And that's represented by the 3 blokes repairing potholes up the top. You know, they just go and they just keep going back, and they don't look at any root cause as to why these potholes are occurring or anything else. And then you move to, in an attempt to try and save money, you go to a sort of condition-based model, where if it isn't broke, don't touch it. If everything's working fine, then it must be working fine. So don't do anything about it. But that leads to a sort of a reactionary maintenance regime where you haven't maintained it properly, and it's broken and you need to go and fix it now. So it is very reactive and very immediate. And certainly some of the places that we're talking about here, access can be very difficult to get to. So you really need to look at or move or try to move towards a predictive maintenance model. And really the only way you can do that is through monitoring and asset management. And that's what we're kind of leading up to at the end of this overview. So to talk about IALA, how they bring it all in together, their mission statement is successful voyages and sustainable planet. Mike mentioned it at the beginning. Presently, they are a non-governmental organization, but over the past 3 years, they have been, or longer, should I say, they have been working towards an intergovernmental organization. And yet I'm very delighted that Francis Zachariah will come and tell us more about that, but it's not too far off. They're based in Paris and they have been there since 1957. Of course, the roots of that go a lot further back, where there was a lot of collaboration between the founding members of IALA, and often it was more competitive than anything else. But they finally decided that they should they should all meet together and bring everybody together and really discuss best practice on how you go about achieving the harmonization of aids to navigation across the globe. The picture there is of the engineering committee, and I am in there somewhere. I think up the left-hand side, it's a bit like Where's Wally? But they meet every 6 months, and we generally get between 50 and 70 members. There are about 155, 160 industrial members, and approximately 80 national members from across the globe. In fact, we are meeting virtually this week. I was up very late last night discussing the fine principles on how to measure surface colours on the revision of the guideline on surface colours. So we are meeting virtually and having these discussions. And the output from them is really the recommendations and the guidelines. It's based on best practice. And you can choose to adopt them or not. But as we've already discussed, it's written in SOLAS, and when IALA become an IGO, then it will be written in law. So just to give you an idea or an example of a recommendation, this is IALA recommendation, what used to be the old operations committee, that's why it's called O130, and now it's recommendation 0130. And this is on the categorization and availability objects for short-range aids to navigation. Now, short-range aids to navigation is anything within the visual range. So it does actually include VHF transmission as well, as part of short-range aids to navigation. So they categorize them in 3 categories. Category 1 is for vital navigational significance. So that's a primary route or a channel or an isolated danger. It may be an isolated danger is a category 1 aid to navigation. It may be the front pair on a channel, the first gated pair of buoys on the channel, or it may be a cardinal mark. It could be a lighthouse. And it's also, you should bear in mind that even within a system of aids to navigation, it can have different categorizations. So the light, for example, could be category 1, and the fog signal could be a category 3 fog signal. So the objective really is for a category 1 to be 99.8% available to the mariner. So how do you know that? How do you know that that is your availability objectives? And we're going to cover that later on through monitoring and asset management, because that's the only way that you really know that that aid to navigation is available to the mariner for that period of time. So where are they going next, IALA? Like I said, they're moving to IGO. They had their final diplomatic conference in February. Earlier this year, they managed to get it in and out and done and out the way. And so the agreement is now sitting in Paris, waiting for 20 countries to go and sign it. And as soon as 20 countries sign it, IALA will become an IGO. Now, what will happen after that is these standards will come into full effect, and they'll have equal gravity as IMO and IHO. And there are the 7 standards there on the right-hand side. So taking standard marine aids to navigation, design and delivery, the S1020 standard. At the bottom there, these are the recommendations that come under that. And so they can be normative or informative. So normative is you must follow, you shall follow, and informative are you should follow. So you'll see the example I gave there, the categorization and availability objectives is listed as a normative recommendation under that standard. So what's going to happen? If you claim to be IALA compliant, likelihood is you'll end up getting audited. And someone from IALA will come and visit you, and you'll need to demonstrate how you IALA compliant. Let's talk about monitoring. So we've covered everything. And of course, you can monitor your aids to navigation by paying someone to look at it. So you can have an observer. I know when I was at the Northern Lighthouse Board in the early 90s, we still had paid observers. And if you changed anything, they would ring up and say, hey, this light is coming on an hour later than it normally does. What's wrong? You know, that kind of thing. So they're very, very useful and very handy to have. But if you've got an AtoN network or a large AtoN network, that's a lot of people and a lot of phone calls. So of course, nowadays with modern technology, you can actually have a device on board or within the AtoN system that will send back signals to say, hey, I'm on, everything's okay, or hey, I've got a bit of a problem here, my battery's starting to go flat, you know, come and change my battery, or come and do something because I'm not feeling very well here. So you can do this with GSM technology, and now we've seen this with 2G, 3G, we're going into 4G now, 5G's coming, and whatever else is happening. But you don't really have a lot of control over that, because you're at the mercy of the telcos and what they're going to do. And they may say, well, hey, do you know what, we're going to switch off 2G. And then what do you do? So then you could look at perhaps an AIS network, and it's free. It's VHF, it's free, you can transmit, as long as you can get it back to a base station somewhere. You know, you can transmit, you can monitor over message 6, you can get those messages in, you can monitor it. But it's quite a large capital investment, and you do need to get an MMSI number, which can be quite complicated to get hold of by the issuing authority. And of course, you need a radio license for that as well. So there's quite a significant capital cost to an AIS network. But of course, once you've got it up and running, it's essentially a free service or a free system. And now there's been leaps and bounds in satellite communication technology, making it very, very low power, making it cost competitive with GSM. And of course, our own lanterns now that come with satellite communications are very cost competitive with GSM models. And it's a fully global system. You don't have to worry about what SIM card I'm going to get from wherever I'm going to get it. It's a pole-to-pole global coverage system. So you can put it in anywhere in the world. And you can connect it through to our web portal, Star2M, which is what I'm going to talk about now, where you can gather all your assets into one place, one easy to access web portal You just sign on in the morning, have a look at your AtoNs, make sure all your notifications are all nice and green, everything's working well, and it's all in one place, and it'll accept all these multiple feeds. The graphic here at the bottom is a snapshot of about a month's worth of data. And it shows, you know, you've had a few ups and downs. There you can see on the 12th of September, particularly dark day. It did rain all day in Melbourne that day, so there wasn't a lot of charge current going on that day. But the bottom line is that the maximum voltage is still way above 14 volts, so everything's working fine there. But you can use this historical data to do your predictive maintenance. So when you see trends in these charge currents or daily loads changing or going down, you can say, hey lads, it's about time we started planning a maintenance visit to get out there and maybe look at the battery and do that. And of course it comes with an app, with a mobile app, and maintenance technicians can upload maintenance reports, pictures, videos, and everything up to the web portal, which could be analyzed, and it can be downloaded and stored as PDF files or whatever. Now, we also recognize that a lot of people have got some kind of monitoring system or some kind of asset management system in place. It might be Maximo or something or other. So we do provide an API key here, so it will seamlessly integrate with your existing systems. And just to finish off, here's a sort of picture of the dashboard. I log into mine every morning. I get a picture view of the dashboard of what's going on. So I can see how many AtoNs I've got in my network, how many alarms I've got, what's working, what's not working, and I can drill deeper. And hopefully some of you have been attending the Start2M webinars that Mike has been running, and got a lot out of that as well. It's absolutely vital to carry out a risk assessment, because you can really use it as a business case to improve your race to navigation. In the example I gave earlier, if you've got 2 technicians going every month to a site just to flick a switch, that can be quite costly. So by installing that UPS battery system, it may cost you $10,000, but the return on investment pays itself back over a year very, very comfortably. And if you do that for all your end of life or re-engineering, or when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, it really informs your asset management plan, and it can then inform your capital budget for what works that you're going to do, because you can use your risk matrix to tick off the priorities from the top to the bottom. By doing this, you're going to reduce costs, because you can move to a predictive maintenance model by monitoring and asset managing. And ultimately what you're providing is a better service that has more availability and more reliability. And that's what we're here to do. And that's what we are here as Sealite, to support you in doing what you're doing. You'll find all the resources for all the references that I've made. Marianne will provide those to you afterwards. And of course, if you want to give our Start2M you can have a free trial of it and add a few assets, and Mike will be able to sort you out with that.
All right, thanks Malcolm. All righty, we'll now just move into the final session today, where we'll now dive into the Q&A chat box. So we'll just fire into the first question. The first question is, when will our next webinar be? That will be set down for the 5th of November. Malcolm will be our veritable host, and our guest speaker on that occasion will be Captain Roger Barker from Trinity House. And then we can just see there in a moment, we'll just demonstrate, we'll illustrate the rest of the remaining webinars. So webinars number 3, 4 and 5 will be moving through December into January in the new calendar year. Thanks for your question. The next question we've received, one for Malcolm. Do we know how many signatures there has been to the declaration in Paris so far, Malcolm?
None that I'm aware of yet, Michael. As the pandemic hit, you know, about a month after the agreement moved to Paris, nobody's been able to get there and sign it. But I'm sure France have signed it as they are there. So hopefully Francis will be able to give us an update when he comes on in early December, and he'll be able to give us the exact figures.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Another question relates to how can we get assistance with completing risk analyses? I'll probably invite you, Malcolm, just to maybe touch on the Worldwide Academy and their focus or their mission to build capacity and support developing nations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to do is to download yourself a copy of the IALA CIRA and have a look at it. And of course, I'd be more than happy to take any questions, you know, offline to any of our participants today. It's not really my forte, risk assessment, but I can certainly try and help build your risk assessment models. I mean, it's not as simple as I kind of made out. You know, you have to take into account all sorts of stakeholders, you know, contractors to who you're supplying to pilots, to your customers, and what you're trying to achieve. But it really, really helps, I think, and it really demonstrates it, and it really puts it on that bit of paper, and you've got a record of it, that you have indeed done a risk assessment on that particular aid to navigation, and that way it gives you a lot of confidence in what you're doing in that type of provision.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well that concludes all the questions. Just to close it out, I touched on before the upcoming webinars. That concludes webinar number 1 today. Webinar number 2, we will have Roger online, where we're going to work our way through the IALA risk assessment models. Roger has incredible experience in this space. Moving beyond that, webinar number 3, 4 and 5 will be following up with all of those details and ability to register in the not too distant future. So I'd just like to close it out. A big thanks to all of you for your participation today. Thank you to Marianne and Malcolm. It's been wonderful, and it'd be wonderful if all of the participants today could just spend a few seconds just completing a short survey at the conclusion of this webinar. I hope you've enjoyed today's content, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, bye for now and be safe. Thank you.